This is the famous design of Oldsmobile's Cutlass Supreme. It's one big reason why more mid-sized car buyers chose Cutlass over the last 4 years than any other car.
Back in 1961, General Motors first introduced the Cutlass name on its new compact wide-body platform. It soon grew in size, becoming a classic muscle car, as well as sedans, wagons, and convertibles, eventually earning the title of best-selling car in America. The Cutlass name was put on 3 different car lines in the 80s, only to slowly fade away by the mid-90s and dying less than 5 years before the death of the entire Oldsmobile brand. This is the story of the Oldsmobile Cutlass. This is my old car.
Why don't you take a test drive at your Oldsmobile dealer now and discover the great Cutlass feeling too? Olds Cutlass Supreme. Have one built for you.
Thanks for the many suggestions to review the Oldsmobile Cutlass. This car's platform was shared by many other GM cars, several of which I hope to feature in future episodes. If you were a kid growing up in the 70s and 80s, you likely couldn't get too far from home without seeing an Oldsmobile Cutlass, if your family didn't already own one. Your parents may have even put you in the way back seat of the classic station wagon version of the Cutlass, the Vista Cruiser. But when GM first used the Cutlass name on an Oldsmobile model, you likely didn't see it on the road nearly as often. The Cutlass name was a trim level on Oldsmobile's compact F85 model starting in 1961, sharing its wide-body platform with the Pontiac Tempest and Buick Special. Whereas the F85 Club Coupe was Oldsmobile's lowest priced car, the F85 Cutlass was more luxury themed and came with a 185 horsepower V8 that actually required premium fuel. By 1962, they also offered the Jetfire trim, with the first production turbocharged V8, making 215 horsepower. This engine was also called the Turbo Rocket, the Rocket name having been a trademark for Oldsmobile engines since 1949. But this first generation of Cutlass was not a big seller, prompting GM to go bigger for the second gen starting in 1964.
Oldsmobile's roomier, sportier. F85 Cutlass for $64.
Although the wheelbase only increased by 3 inches, the overall length increased by 13 inches. The Cutlass shared this new A-body platform with the new Chevy Chevelle, as well as the restyled Buick Special and the Pontiac Tempest and GTO. Unlike the slower-selling first-gen cars, the second-gen Cutlass soon became Oldsmobile's best-selling model. Some of that success was due to the introduction of the 442 model, which got its name from its 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed transmission, and dual exhaust, with a 5.4-liter V8 making 310 horsepower. And by 1965, the famous Oldsmobile Rocket logo was introduced that remained on the car until the early 90s. Starting in its third generation in 1968, the GM A-body platform was completely restyled.
Discover the young ideas in any Olds Cutlass, in any of the 1968 Young Mobiles.
And the Cutlass now shared a platform with several more GM cars, such as the Chevy Monte Carlo, Malibu, and El Camino, the Pontiac Le Mans and Grand Prix, and the Buick Skylark and GSX. The original F85 name remained as the base model, as was the mid-level Cutlass S trim.
That's not really your uncle's house, is it?
Oh yeah, trust me.
But the Cutlass Supreme name was first used in 1968 as the upscale trim. The 442 trim split from the Cutlass lineup to become a separate model. The 442 also got its own higher performance version called the Hurst Olds, with the famous Hurst Performance manual transmission shifter mated to the 455 cubic inch 7.5 liter Rocket V8. By 1969, the trademark split grille was introduced, a look that would remain in some form with almost every Cutlass that followed. And by 1970, you could get your Cutlass in 3 different coupes, 2 different sedans, a convertible, and 2 different wagons, the best being the classic Vista Cruiser. A trim package available on the 1970 coupes was the Rally 350, which had performance car looks, but had the smallest V8 available, making it a more obtainable option for younger buyers. You could also get a Hurst dual gate shifter, which allowed for either automatic or manual shift modes. By 1972, the 442 returned to being a Cutlass trimline, now being an appearance package available with all V8 engines. And the highest sport trim, the Hurst Olds, was a pace car for the Indy 500 that year, and of course, replica models were available. Fourth-gen Cutlasses began in 1973 on a modified version of GM's A-body platform, which still offered coupes, sedans, and wagons, but the convertibles were gone. New in 73 was the Salon package, which was meant to be an upscale European-style trim. Although manual transmissions were still available, very few were sold, so much so that by 1974, the 3-speed automatic, known as a Turbo Hydromatic, was standard. Most buyers opted for the smallest rocket V8, the 350 cubic inch, making 180 horsepower. By 1975, the Cutlass became Oldsmobile's best-selling car, trailing only the Chevy Caprice and Impala.
It's a good feeling to have an Olds around you.
But by 1976, the Cutlass overtook the Chevy to become America's best-selling car, a title it held onto for many years into the 1980s. The highest production year was 1977, with over 632,000 built. The fifth-generation Cutlass started in 1978 with a drastically changed A-body platform, shared with Chevrolet, Pontiac, and Buick, with a 6-inch shorter wheelbase and lighter weight to improve fuel economy.
There's a lot of news in Olds today.
Engine options from the other divisions were now also available in the Cutlass, as well as a diesel V8. Each of the 5th-gen models took on a much more squared-off look that would become the signature style for many cars of the early 80s.
New Oldsmobiles are in early this year.
However, its most unusual body style was a fastback, sometimes referred to as the aeroback, presumably because it had a more aerodynamic look. Despite the fact that the rear window was shaped as if it belonged on a hatchback, it wasn't a hatchback, instead having the trunk opening below the rear window. The aeroback look proved to not be a hit, with it only lasting until 1980 for the 4-door and 1981 for the 2-door. This revised A-body platform had one cost-cutting feature that would be unthinkable today. The rear windows on the 4-door models could not be opened. It wasn't due to not being enough room to drop the window. If so, they could have at least dropped the window part way. But they were fixed in place with no controls to lower them. This sad example of cost-cutting amazingly lasted 5 whole years. Starting in 1982, the Cutlass was no longer a single model line, but instead the name was split across 2 different platforms. The Cutlass Supreme continued to stay on a rear-wheel drive platform, as the Cutlass had always been up to that point, but that rear-wheel drive platform was now called the G-body.
Even today, there's still room to do it with style.
The Hurst Olds edition came back as an option on the Cutlass Supreme in 1983 and 84, followed by the 442 name being brought back as a performance model for 1985 through 87, each offering Oldsmobile's 307 cubic inch 5-liter V8. With the Supreme now a separate model, the former rear-wheel drive A-body switched to the new mid-sized front-wheel drive platform, now named the Cutlass Ciera.
Cutlass Ciera, an Oldsmobile, a Cutlass with front-wheel drive and very practical.
Which also was the base for the 5th-gen Buick Century, the new Chevy Celebrity, and the new Pontiac 6000. The new A-body was actually derived from the X-body, best known for the Chevy Citation and Pontiac Phoenix. Yeah, I know, they should definitely have a My Old Car episode someday. The new A-body also introduced the first 4-cylinder engines for any Cutlass up to that point, making less than 100 horsepower, which itself was also a first. A V6 returned to the lineup, the first since the 2nd-gen models, and for the first time, no V8 was offered. Despite the Cutlass name being used on what was clearly an entirely different car, it was just as clear that the public liked the change as well, with the Ciera quickly becoming Oldsmobile's best-selling model. By 1984, the wagon option on the rear-wheel drive Cutlass Supreme, then known as the Cutlass Cruiser, was dropped, shifting over to the Ciera line as a mid-size wagon. Between 1983 and 86, Oldsmobile also offered a convertible version of the Ciera, designed by aftermarket company Hess and Eisenhart, who did the same for other GM and Jaguar models. The same company also designed armored vehicles for Head's estate around the world. The Cutlass Ciera lasted until 1996, when its name changed to just being called the Ciera, dropping the Cutlass from its name in its last year. With the Cutlass Ciera selling well, it became clear to Oldsmobile that the Cutlass name could work on a 3rd model. Looking to introduce a new compact model, the slot above the smaller J-body Forenza, in 1985, Oldsmobile introduced the Cutlass Calais, a name previously used as a top trim level of the Supreme Coupe. The Calais was built on GM's N-body platform, shared by the Buick Skylark and Pontiac Grand Am, and initially shared the GM Iron Duke 4-cylinder engine. Later, the N-body cars were upgraded to the Quad 4, a 16-valve high-output engine which Oldsmobile often touted in their advertising. The Calais lasted until 1991, where it was replaced by the Ciera in 1992. Meanwhile, the rear-wheel drive Cutlass Supreme soldiered on, still offering V8 power.
Cutlass, I need one.
But the rear-wheel drive platform was not selling as well as the Ciera and Calais models. Starting in 1983, GM started development on the front-wheel drive W-body platform, which was intended to replace both the A and G platforms. This $7 billion plan was ultimately supposed to be used for mid-size cars like the Cutlass Ciera, but although two of the A-body cars, the Celebrity and 6000, died by 1991, the Ciera and its Buick counterpart, the Century, remained on the old A-body platform. 1988 was a transitional year for the Cutlass Supreme, with the old rear-wheel drive model entering its final year, being called the Cutlass Supreme Classic. But that same year, buyers could get the new Supreme on its new front-wheel drive W platform.
Ready, Dad?
I'm ready. You ready?
I'm ready.
Steady as she goes.
Shared with the Pontiac Grand Prix, Buick Regal, and Chevy Lumina. A convertible version, modified by Cars and Concepts of Michigan, was also available for the 1988 model on just 50 Indy Pace car replica models. But that soon proved to be a liability due to insufficient bracing and lack of crash testing, causing all of them to later be returned or recalled. Initially only available in coupe form, by 1990 the Supreme also offered a four-door sedan and convertible, the latter being offered from the factory, as opposed to the previous failed aftermarket conversion attempt. The new styling was clearly intended to shift the minds of buyers that their cars were, as they touted in their ads, not their father's Oldsmobile.
This is not your father's Oldsmobile.
With the small quad headlamps offered on the sportier trims that mimicked a similar look of the Pontiac Grand Prix. They even sold the first cars to offer a heads-up display, but they also dropped the V8s of the past, now offering the Quad 4 or multiple V6 options. By the end of the Supreme's run in 1997, Oldsmobile had already dropped the other Cutlass variants, the Ciera and Calais, but the Cutlass name didn't die there. For 3 more years, from 1997 to 99, the Cutlass name returned on what was essentially a rebadged and slightly more upscale Chevy Malibu, but it was never intended to be a long-term model, instead being a stopgap before its replacement, the Oldsmobile Alero. The Alero had only just started when GM announced in 2000 that it would phase out the entire Oldsmobile brand over the next 4 years.
CEO Rick Wagoner announced today that General Motors has decided
to not develop future products for Oldsmobile,
with the Alero itself being the last Oldsmobile ever built on April 29, 2004. The Cutlass model name, despite losing some of its cachet near the end of its run, still managed to survive for 36 years, one of the longest model runs of any American automaker. As a teenager in the 80s, I saw the Cutlass virtually everywhere, as its simple, although somewhat bland styling during those years made it popular for the millions of Americans who just wanted a straightforward, non-flashy family car. The muscle car Cutlasses of the 60s and 70s are celebrated at car shows, but finding a Ciera at a car show is very rare, and only as a novelty that somebody bothered to preserve it. But over the next decade, those are the cars which may, someday, become classics. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today, and you would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.